Well, you guys voted for it, and you are getting it. Although people did, I think, vote a little bit more for Jason, and we'll get to Jason soon enough because there is a big tie-in to Halloween and definitely Halloween Ends. But let us begin with Freddy and New Nightmare, which might seem strange because New Nightmare is technically not even a Freddy film when you think it through. But I do think, as a point of comparison, it holds up pretty well, not just as a film, but also a model. And I think that is kind of what they're trying to do with Halloween Ends, but shows how difficult that is. I'm not going to go too far into New Nightmare itself. I do love it. There are many things to praise about it. It does have clear flaws too, of course. And I'm very well aware of some of the flaws. They redesigned Freddy. I think for the most part, it's fine. The script is pretty good, but it does in places sort of feel a little slack. So I'm aware of its virtues and what's also bad about it. I will just give a short description and then we'll move into a more sustained comparison. There will be minor spoilers for both New Nightmare and, of course, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, as well as the Halloween franchise, but I'll try to keep it light. So essentially, what happens in New Nightmare is we're meeting Nancy, but it's really Heather. So the focus is on Heather, the actress. It's not literally the real actress, of course. She's playing a fictionalized version of herself, and her role as Nancy in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. It does follow the series where Freddy technically died, right? With Freddy's dead. So Freddy as a character has been destroyed. But New Line wants to bring the character back, and we don't really meet Freddy as much as this kind of demonic entity that wants to think it's Freddy to sort of gain power into the real world. It's a very fascinating film, but I think pretty good at both the levels of being a horror film, but also very interesting kind of meta film on the legacy of Freddy. And that is where we're getting with Halloween Ends, because it seems to me that's what they're kind of trying to do is do their version of New Nightmare, where this film isn't really about Michael or even Laurie. It's about the legacy of Halloween on the fandom and how we think about Michael as an icon and what we think about Laurie as an icon. And they're going to introduce these new characters that will hopefully help out in exploring that relationship we have with these other people. Because he called it a love song, which seems a little weird to describe Michael. But I think the problem, though, is, and this is where New Nightmare, I think, is something that worked, and the other attempts like this have not worked, is we have a full story with Freddy. Granted, it's inconsistent, it has flaws. If you've seen the quote main franchise, yes, the story doesn't make a whole lot of sense at certain points, but overall, we know the basic premise with Freddy, why he faces the people he faces, why he gets defeated, why he comes back, and they did put it to a satisfying conclusion. It could have been better, but I actually like Freddy's Dead. I know a lot of people hate it, but the basic gist is we do have a full story, so when we have New Nightmare, it's a kind of epilogue to that main story. The main story is finished. Now we're reflecting on that story, its effect on the actors, the fandom, and how we think about Freddy as this kind of both horror icon, but a character we're very familiar with. And the problem is they've kind of done this with Halloween in this new trilogy, but again, they haven't really completed the story, so it feels preemptive to do kind of epilogue because technically the sequels have been wiped out. The only story we have are Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills. Technically, we have Halloween 1978, but the 2018 film handled that. That was a very large scale homage to the first film. So it feels like with this new Michael, we haven't spent enough time with him and or Laurie, so who they are seems to me a big question mark. If we included the sequels, we might have a fuller picture, but those sequels no longer count. And that brings up a deeper problem with the franchises when we compare them that Halloween has had separate universes. I mean, I've lost count. I think technically Michael is in 5 different universes. Freddy has been in only one universe. We have one main story. Halloween has branched off to different stories. Some of them do connect, some of them can be connected. Like technically H2O is separate from Halloween 4 and 5 and Curse of Michael Myers. But in your mind, you can basically in your mind, you can kind of see Michael still went through the Thorn trilogy, but it was a sidestep to get back to hunting Laurie. But then the Rob Zombie films seem to be their own thing. They don't have any real connection to the other films, and so on and so forth. So we have all these different branched out stories, but they're not unified in the way that Freddy's stories were unified. Granted, they have inconsistencies and problems, but it's still one main story we can all come back to, and the fandom can agree this is the canon, this is the main story. So we have a more definite idea of who Freddy is. So when Freddy faces, quote, Heather, and Heather is playing Nancy, We know what's going on because we spent enough time with Freddy, with Nancy, so we know who she is, and we know who Heather is, who is the actress, and we know who Robert is, who plays Freddy. And that's another problem, is that we've had inconsistent Michaels. We've had different people play Michael. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that is a different factor. Whereas Robert has been Freddy for so many films, including New Nightmare, that he is Freddy to most of the fandom. But we have different Michaels, different branched out stories. So there's a lot of instability already with the Michael stories. And we're kind of pretending they're unified, even though within its own internal history, those sequels never happened. So we're kind of always thinking, well, which Michael are we looking at? It just seems a Michael contrived for this trilogy that doesn't really exist. It just feels like it's not really real. It's too weak to sustain what they're trying to do. I am hopeful maybe they'll pull it off. It will be like New Nightmare. It's something that's experimental, unexpected, and over time the fandom will appreciate it. It's not really Freddy, but it's Freddy enough that we can enjoy it at both levels as a horror film, but also kind of Freddy film, but a different kind of Freddy film. But so far, at least for me, this trilogy has not been working at that level because it just feels very disjointed. It doesn't really feel connected to one another. So even the trilogy internally feels very, very weak. So now we're adding this epilogue chapter, but you haven't even finished the full story. We're just forcing it to a premature conclusion, saying Halloween 2018, Halloween Kills together is its own trilogy when we include Halloween 1978. That is the trilogy. This is the New Nightmare version now that we're going to get with the epilogue. That just feels kind of phony to me. But I hope they do accomplish the task, but it just seems like this is a kind of different beast. You can't really do a New Nightmare with this in the same way, or at least not mechanically. So I don't think they found a creative enough solution to resolve the New Nightmare dilemma that they're trying to do what Wes Craven did, I think, very brilliantly, but do it for their own horror icon. I hope it works, but I have my doubts, and that's where I stand with trying to apply the New Nightmare lesson to Halloween Ends.